Hello, hello. Is this on? Not yet. Good? There we go. All right, guys, it's 5 o'clock. Let's get this thing started. So my name's Lance Crandall. I'm a program manager on the MDOP team, and I specifically cover both UEV and MBAM. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the new things that are coming with the next version of MBAM. And I'm excited that you guys are all here this late in the day. I mean, you guys are the die-hard information protection people. You know, you really want to see what you can do to protect data in your organization. So I'm going to make a really bold, unsubstantiated claim here that if you take the information that you receive in this session and you go back to your organization and you implement it, you know, it's not going to take you very much time to implement this stuff, that you're probably going to land that really big promotion that you've been shooting for. So totally unsubstantiated, but I'm pretty confident that's what's going to happen. So with that, let's get started. So today we're really going to focus on deploying BitLocker in your environment and really how MBAM can make that a snap, really, for you. It can make it an easy experience. And so if we kind of look over the past year, there's been a lot of data breaches in major organizations, right? So this is, you know, major companies that you've all heard of. You probably do business with them. You know, some of the largest companies in the world with a lot of resources at their disposal, and they've had a data breach. They've lost data. It's been highly publicized, and I'm not going to call out any names of any of these companies, but they're, you know, you guys are familiar with some of these situations that I'm referring to, and you know, that costs these companies a lot of money. So it's, you know, things like paying for credit monitoring for consumers. It's fines they may have to face depending on the type of data, and it's really a lot of, you know, loss of trust, I guess, between consumers and some of these companies. They lose face depending on what that information was, and they don't know if they trust doing business with them again or anything like that because they don't really know that their data is protected, right? So there's a lot of different ways that these attacks happen, right? So, you know, there's cyber attacks, there's internal data leakage that may happen, and there's things like, you know, obviously the loss or theft of a physical device, right? So what is Microsoft really doing to support you with protecting your data in your environment? So there's really three main pillars that we're looking at in the Windows 10 timeframe. So the first one's pretty obvious. It's device protection. And when we talk about that, we're talking about encrypting your device. And you know, that's kind of just the table stakes, I guess, to protect data in your organization. So if one of those devices gets lost or gets stolen, you know that that data is protected. You don't have to worry about the data leakage there. So the second one is talking about a new feature that's being shipped with Windows 10, and it's called Enterprise Data Protection. Now, there's a really great session that's going to talk about this in more detail tomorrow. I highly recommend that you attend that. But Enterprise Data Protection is trying to help you manage your data through policies that you have through either Intune or through Configuration Manager. And it allows you to set those policies so that you know, the data that you have is encrypted at the file level, right? So you can kind of separate this corporate data from your personal data, and IT has control over that corporate data. So they can do remote wipes, different things like that to protect your data. So if you copy that data to a USB drive, you can maintain that encryption and make sure that the data is secure. So the third piece here is, what if you want to share data outside of your organization? You want to share it with, you know, a partner company that you have or with consumers or particular people. And this really has to deal with RMS. So when you protect a file, RMS is kind of the solution there to grant specific rights and protect that data in a way that you can send the data out, but realize that maybe it won't get forwarded, it can't get, you know, copied, those sorts of things. And so those are kind of the three main areas when we think about the Windows 10 information protection stack. So you've got the device protection with encryption. You have the enterprise data protection where you're preventing this accidental you know, leakage of this data, and then RMS to share that data outside of your organization. So those are kind of the three main pieces. Obviously, this session is going to talk about the first one there with device protection. So there's a study that was done a few years ago, and it kind of came back with some shocking information. So if you look at this, it's saying that there's over 12,000 laptops that get lost in airports every single week. 12,000. And this is just US airports. So that's about 600,000 laptops a year that get lost or stolen just by being left in an airport. Now, that doesn't cover, you know, I left it in a coffee shop, I left it on a train, you know, I left it at this conference somewhere. You know, so that number is probably significantly higher, especially since we think about the fact that most of us are probably carrying 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 devices with us at any time, right? So there's even more likelihood we're going to misplace something. So this is shocking. And these devices are going to have company data on it. They could, right? So we want to make sure that that data gets protected. So more and more companies, as we think about it, are turning to BitLocker to protect that data. And that's something we've seen ever since kind of the migration to Windows 7 happened. Obviously, that was a huge thing a couple of years back. And most of the companies that I've talked to were on a third-party product, and they moved to BitLocker. So since this is a 200-level session, most of you are probably pretty familiar with BitLocker, but there's probably some terminology that we should just review just to make sure that you understand the concept of BitLocker, what it all means, and that's all going to come in handy as we get into talking about MBAM in a little more detail. So we're going to give you kind of the 10,000-foot view. So it's not 30,000 feet, but it's also not like ground level here. So BitLocker is a full volume encryption solution. So the keyword there is volume. It's not full disk encryption. And there's 3 different volume types. So the first one is your operating system volume, which makes sense. That's got your operating system on it. And there's also fixed data drives. And fixed data drives are things like you have a secondary hard drive, or you have a second partition on an existing hard drive, like your D drive, right? So that's kind of what a fixed data drive is. And there's also removable drives. So those are USB drives. So those are the 3 different volumes that BitLocker can protect. When you start to encrypt a device, it creates a recovery key, or it can create a recovery key, which allows you that if you do get locked out of that device, you have a means to recover the data on that device. Many of you have probably deployed BitLocker in your organizations at this point, and you've probably hit the recovery screen, and you enter that recovery key and it unlocks the device so you can now gain access to that data again. And there's a second recovery mechanism, which is called DRA. And a DRA is just a certificate. And it's kind of really, really painful. I kind of don't recommend that you deploy that in your organization, because what happens is, since it's certificate-based, if you do go into recovery, you have to ship that device to somebody that has access to the certificate, and they can unlock it for you. So obviously, that's a super painful recovery experience. So recovery keys are kind of the way to go here. Now, BitLocker has a couple of cool things that were added in the Windows 8 timeframe that can make encrypting your devices much, much faster. So if you think about like a 500 gig hard drive, if you want to fully encrypt that disk byte by byte, or sector by sector, essentially that could take like 6 hours, it could take 8 hours. It kind of depends on if it's an SSD device or if it's kind of the standard mechanical devices that have been in the market for years. And so with Windows 8, BitLocker added the ability to encrypt just what's used on the disk. So there's really no point in encrypting the entire disk when there's no data on a lot of that disk. So BitLocker gave you that ability to use disk-based only encryption, which encrypts just what's used. To make that even cooler, they added the ability in Windows PE, when you're doing your imaging, that you can turn on a BitLocker before any data actually gets written to the device. So if you think about a bare metal device, you boot up into WinPE, you're about to install your image, but before you do that, you turn on BitLocker with use disk-based only encryption, and then as you start to deploy your image, it's being encrypted as it goes. And so by the time your imaging process is done, you're fully encrypted with the data that's on that device, and any data you add to that device after the fact is also encrypted. So it's really great. It can significantly speed up the amount of time to image a device, make sure it's protected before you hand it over to an end user, and you can feel really confident that data is protected. So the one caveat to this is that you have to have a TPM to use this pre-provisioning piece. And so the TPM has to be on and available to the operating system to see in WinPE before you start using this. And we're going to kind of walk through that process a little bit later when we get more into deployment. So let's talk about BitLocker protectors a little bit. So a protector is kind of like the gate, right? So your data is behind this gate, and you have to have some sort of mechanism to get into that gate to be able to access the data. So it's kind of like, in this case, it can be what's called a TPM protector. It can be a TPM plus PIN, or it can also be a password protector. So the latter two here, TPM plus PIN and password, are kind of the pre-boot authentication. So if you've deployed BitLocker in your environment, many of you have probably deployed it with a PIN. And a PIN is something that you have to enter before you can actually even log onto your device. It's all pre-boot. A password is generally used if you have non-TPM devices. So if there's no TPM on your device, then that's something you have to use. We're going to get into more detail about what TPM means in a minute and what it's all about, just so we can kind of understand that. But those are kind of the 3 common protectors. Generally, people will use a TPM protector on their desktop machines, and then they'll use TPM plus PIN or password on mobile devices. So when we look at fixed data drives and removable drives, there's 2 protectors. And the first one is auto unlock, and the second one is a password protector. So auto unlock just means that when I boot up my device and I log in to the operating system, it's actually stored the key for that fixed data drive in the operating system drive. And so it automatically unlocks the drive for me. I don't have to double-click it, enter a password, or do anything. And the opposite of that is obviously the password protector, which you do have to double-click it and enter that password. So most people will use auto unlock because it makes it much easier, smoother experience when they log onto a device. So that's kind of the high level of what a protector is. So once you pass the protector, whether that's entering the correct PIN, entering the password, you've unlocked the device, and you're now able to view your data. So to understand some of the things that we're going to talk about later in the presentation, it's important to understand what a TPM is. So a TPM is hardware-based. It's a little chip that sits on your motherboard and has a couple of functions. So the first thing it can do is it can securely generate cryptographic keys that you need for BitLocker or even virtual smart cards and other things like that. The other thing that it does is it will store those keys. And so that's a process called sealing the TPM, or sealing the keys into the TPM. So when it's about to seal it, it takes a bunch of measurements of different things on your device. So for example, it'll take like, what are your BIOS settings, what's the BIOS version, or UEFI, if you're using that, and then it makes sure that when you boot up that device again, if something's changed, it says, whoa, whoa, I don't know what's going on here, so it actually will put you in a BitLocker recovery thing because it thinks that the devices may have been compromised. So it prevents tampering in the sense that if I take out that drive, which is a common way to hack a device, right? Take out the drive, I put it in, I slave it to another device, and I'm able to read the data from that. So in this case, it says, you know, you've broken the key chain there because now it can't get the key from the TPM because you put it on a different device. So it's a good way to prevent tampering that way. The other thing it has is anti-hammering logic. So if I start entering the wrong PIN 70 times or something because I'm trying to brute force guess it, it says, whoa, whoa, I'm under attack, and it will actually send you to BitLocker recovery, which means you have to enter a 48-digit recovery key to be able to access the data at that point. So the tampering prevention that it has is really, really valuable to people as well. Since it is hardware-based, it's not subject to any attacks from the operating system, and so that's really helpful in protecting your data. And the last piece we want to talk about here is TPM spec versions. So there's TPM 1.2, which is in the environment right now, and that's probably what most of you have on most of your devices, except service devices, they come with TPM 2.0. So TPM 1.2 has a few issues, and one of those is that generally, unless you talk to your hardware manufacturer like HP or Dell or Lenovo, it's not turned on by default in the BIOS. So it means that you have to actually find some method to turn it on, or have your techs manually go turn it on before they image a device. It's kind of painful that way. And that's probably one of the most common challenges that people face with deploying BitLocker is getting that stupid TPM enabled, right? How many of you had that issue? Everybody, sweet. Yep, it's painful. So the other issue with TPM 1.2 is that when they created the spec for this, they kind of gave it a really vague lockout period. So when you have typed in my PIN wrong too many times and it's protecting itself, it locks out the TPM so that no new requests can be accessed by that. And so the problem with that is that every manufacturer that has a TPM implementation has dealt with that lockout threshold differently. And so for one manufacturer, it might be that it locks it out for 30 seconds or a minute or 5 minutes. And then another manufacturer might be 5 days. And so that means that every time that you reboot a device and that TPM's locked out, it can't get at that key. And so you go into a BitLocker recovery every single time. So that's super painful, right? It's a painful recovery experience. So with TPM 2.0, they said, okay, this is super painful. People have trouble provisioning this thing, and they have trouble with this lockout because no one knows how long it's going to be, and it's impacting end-user productivity. So they made sure that it's on by default in the BIOS, which is great when it ships, and I don't have to worry about all this crazy provisioning stuff we'll talk about. And then the other piece is it has a consistent 2-hour lockout period. So that means that within 2 hours, it'll automatically unlock itself, and the user's back up and running. So those are kind of two benefits there. Before you can use a TPM, like I mentioned, you have to actually turn it on in the BIOS or in UEFI. And there's a bunch of ways that you can do that. We're going to go through some of those, but each manufacturer of hardware generally has some way that you can interact with the BIOS and change settings from within the full operating system. And the way that they all do it is completely varied, but that's one way that you can do it. The last thing is that something has to own the TPM. And all that means is that you have to create a TPM owner auth password that allows you to actually utilize the TPM to generate keys or store keys or whatever. So generally like Windows or MBAM or something else that you have in your environment that you need to utilize the TPM first will take ownership. So what does MBAM really provide when it comes to managing BitLocker. So MBAM is an enterprise class product that sits on top of BitLocker. It's separate from BitLocker, and it helps you to manage it in ways that it can't do by itself. So if I wanted to enable BitLocker in my environment without MBAM, I can't just set some group policies that say, hey, I want it to look like this, and then automatically everything's just working on my devices. All the machines start encrypting, they're escrowing their recovery keys automatically, people are getting prompted to add pins, different things like that. So it's kind of painful to do. So MBAM came in and said, hey, we want to make this a lot easier to enact BitLocker. So that's kind of the first thing. So how do I enable BitLocker in my environment? So it can do that kind of under the covers. You can integrate it with your existing deployment tools so that as you're deploying your images, BitLocker is getting enabled. It's escrowing that recovery information to the MBAM backend. And once the user logs in, if you have a different policy like TPM plus PIN, where they need to enter their own PIN, then they get prompted to enter that information. So that way you don't have to write your own scripts, your own UIs, or do anything like that to be able to get them to actually enter that information so they're protected according to your policies. So the next thing is that we really need to make sure that the devices, we can report on the compliance of these devices. So if a laptop got stolen from your CEO and you needed to be able to determine, like, was there data on this, was there data we need to report on this device, then you can actually go to the reports, enter their information, and be able to pull up whether or not that device was encrypted. And at that point, you can say, hey, I don't need to report anything publicly. We're good. We know that device was encrypted. So that's kind of the benefit of having the compliance reporting piece. Now, the last piece is recovery. So there's various reasons why things go into recovery for your end users, but they need a way to unlock their device and be productive again. And so the first thing that we provide is a help desk portal. And this help desk portal is something just like it sounds. So an end user calls into your help desk goes to this web portal, and the end user will tell them the first 8 digits of what's presented to them on the recovery screen, and they'll read back the key to them. So now the end user can actually go and unlock their device using that key. The second piece is a self-service recovery portal, and it's just like it sounds. So an end user can go to a different device that they have access to, access the self-service portal, and do their own recovery. So when those keys get escrowed the first time, it actually ties a user to a recovery key. And that's how I kind of protect it, so I can't recover my CEO's key. You know, it uses Windows integrated authentication there. So those are kind of the 3 main pieces here. So we have BitLocker enactment, compliance reporting, and the ability to do recovery for all of our end users. So how do I spin this up at a high level? There's other sessions that I've done in the past that kind of go through step-by-step how you install the server components. This is strictly just a logical layout of what a deployment would look like. So it doesn't mean you need 4 servers to spin this up at all. You could do it all on 1 server. We actually recommend you do it on 2 servers at the very least. If you want to get more complicated and have load balancing, disaster recovery on your back end, always recommended things so you can get as simple or as complicated as you want with this. So the first thing is that there's 2 databases, and these databases, one is recovery and one's for audit. So one gives you the compliance pieces that you can report on, the other one stores your keys. We've got some web reports that you can use to see the compliance of your organization, see if a machine was encrypted or not, and then there's a self-service portal, and then the help desk portal. So those are kind of the main sections of components, and again, you can put those all on 1 server or split it out. So we have another mode that you can install into if you're a configuration manager customer that allows the compliance reporting piece to actually go through your configuration manager infrastructure as opposed to going into a separate system. So that gives you kind of that single pane of glass. You can utilize the same infrastructure that you already have for configuration manager and get the reporting that way. So it kind of just depends on how you want to do it in your organization. You can do it either way. They both work great. It just depends on how you want to view it. The last piece here is that you need to set up some policy. So you go download these MBAM ADMX policies. These policies let you actually configure the BitLocker policies. And then there's also the MBAM configuration, which tells your clients where they need to access the MBAM infrastructure. They can escrow recovery information as well as report compliance. So the last piece is the client, right? So we have server components, policy, and client. And really the client, you can install it in your base image. You can install it after your base image. You can push it out through Config Manager. However you deploy an MSI is how you get this on the machine. And then you push out the MBAM policy to those devices that you want to be protected by BitLocker or managed by BitLocker. and MBAM, and then the agent will just do the rest. So it'll help you to enact, it'll report compliance, and just do all those things you'd expect it to do. So that's kind of how the existing product works today, right? So these are the main components. But I'm happy to announce today that we are deploying MBAM, or working on MBAM 2.5 SP1, which will be available soon. And we'll talk about that if you stay with me at the end of the presentation. So that's something to kind of keep you interested until the very end. We'll kind of talk about what the release timing is here. So don't be concerned that this is a service pack. There's actually tons of features in this thing. And so it's pretty much jam-packed full of stuff. So it's not just bug fixes or anything like that. So the first piece is deployment. And so we've, kind of what the title of this presentation was, it was the ability to deploy MBAM and making it easier. So that's one of the things we focused on, and we'll talk about what we've changed in just a minute here. We've also added the ability as part of that deployment process where when an end user logs in to a device that was newly imaged, instead of waiting 90 minutes to prompt the end user to enter a PIN, we'll now do that immediately. So that way, as you're text delivering the device to the end user, if they want to make sure that that device is fully protected according to your policy, they can sit there for 2 seconds once the end user's logged in, and then it'll prompt them. The other piece is we've improved the TPM owner auth escrow piece. And so previously, MBAM had to actually own that, so it could escrow it to the MBAM database. And now we've made some changes so that on Windows 8 Plus devices specifically, we can escrow it even if MBAM didn't own it. So that's a much better experience because Windows 8 is super aggressive with taking ownership of the TPM and escrowing that information. As far as management, we've done some things to allow you, if you're a new customer specifically, maybe you've deployed BitLocker to your environment, everything's backed up into Active Directory. Now, in one fell swoop, you can grab that information and push it over to the MBAM database. So that's really cool to get you up and running kind of on day one. We've also added this ability to automatically unlock your TPM if you get locked out. So I talked about how painful that is, and I have a personal story about that when I was trying to set up these demos a couple days ago. I actually got locked out of my device, and first it was like every 30 seconds, just while I was testing it. Then I got locked out for 12 hours, and I thought I was going to have to reimage my box. Really painful. So this is a really great feature that will kind of help prevent some of that stuff. And then on the server side, there's kind of a few different pieces, right? We got SQL, we got web, we got Active Directory, a few different things. So we've improved our ability to tell you if there's something wrong, if you've configured something wrong, if you're having some sort of like a connectivity issue between your web servers and your database layer, for example. We've made that a lot easier for you to troubleshoot that all on your own. As far as industry compatibility, kind of straightforward, but we're obviously going to support Windows 10 when it comes out, right? So that's part of it. We also support encrypted hard drives. And so these are like specific hard drives that meet a specific spec that use hardware encryption to make the encryption instantly on. So if I turn on BitLocker on one of these devices, it's instantly on across the entire device. So there's no waiting, even with use disk space encryption or anything like that, instantly on.
Will MBAM report if it uses self-encryptor from the hard drive versus BitLocker?
No, it will just report compliance, that it's compliant with the policy. We support international domain names, so if you had East Asian characters in your domain name, we'll support that now. And then there's a really cool thing that we actually released last week, so I guess this is kind of a mini announcement if you didn't hear about it. But FIPS is something that most governments will use. You have to have a specific cryptographic standard. Any government customers in here use FIPS? All right, so you have to have a specific algorithm that you use to create the recovery password. And with Windows 8.1, we actually added that functionality. So we created a FIPS-compliant recovery password. So if you're on Windows 8.1, you could take advantage of this. MBAM, just recovery experience was exactly what you'd expect it to be, where you can go to the help desk portal or self-service portal and grab that information. But on Windows 7, which is where most of our government customers were, people that had FIPS requirements, that didn't exist. So we just recently backported this to Windows 7. And so there's a hotfix that you need to install if you have these requirements. And it will help you to create a FIPS-compliant recovery password. And you won't have that DRA protector anymore that's super painful. So no physical shipping of devices to get those unlocked. So that's pretty awesome. And then as far as customization, you can brand that self-service portal that we have. And you could always do that kind of on the back end. But now you can actually do that as you're installing it. So we make it much easier to discover and do that during install time. There's also the ability to customize the pre-boot recovery screen. And so I'm going to talk about this in more detail yet, but right now, it's kind of a crappy experience if you're an end user and you get to that recovery screen, you don't really know what to do. So we've made it so that's a lot better, and I'm going to give you a demo of that later. We've increased the languages that are supported to 23, and we've also updated the report schema to let you customize your reports. So that's MBAM 2.5 kind of in a nutshell. But let's talk about deployment, because that's kind of what the title of this presentation is, right? So if we think about what's happened previously to do deployments, it was kind of this big manual process. So you had to put in some reg keys, you had to restart services, and you might have been using like some custom scripts out there to try and get this thing going for you, and it was kind of frustrating. So we've completely rewritten this in PowerShell and provided you with a single script that you can use now. It supports Windows 7, so even if you're on Windows 7, it'll still support that with the version of PowerShell that we used. And you can integrate this not only in MDT or SCCM, but even if you had scripted installs, some customers are doing that. You could integrate it very easily into that process as well. So it will provide support for OS volumes, and so we only provided that last time with what MBAM supported previously, and MBAM didn't really understand what a pre-provisioned drive was. So if you're using this cool thing we talked about where it's encrypting as it goes out of the box as you're imaging, MBAM didn't really understand what that was, and it would actually fail later on in the process. So now we'll support the OS volume similar to what was done previously, but we'll also now allow you, if you have a fixed data drive, so let's say you were shipping PCs with a secondary hard drive and you wanted to make sure those were encrypted, so now you can do that during imaging time as well, automatically. So that's pretty cool. And then we'll also understand what a pre-provisioned drive is, and we'll apply a TPM protector on top of it, which makes that encryption active. And the last thing, we already talked about this, but we'll prompt for a PIN when a domain user logs into the device for the first time. So that way, if that was what your policy was, that a PIN was required, now you'll get that immediately instead of having to wait 90 minutes. As far as escrow, previously it didn't actually escrow it unless MBAM owned it. We kind of talked about that. And another piece is that if you're using WinPE to do pre-provisioning, Windows would take ownership within WinPE, and once you reboot in the full operating system, that TPM owner auth is lost forever because WinPE was just running in memory. So we've now provided a way for you to escrow it on Windows 8 Plus, even if you weren't using pre-provisioning. We'll support those pre-provision scenarios, so now you can pass that owner auth to your full operating system, and then we can escrow it. And you'll also get immediate compliance reporting. So instead of having to wait 12 hours, you'll get that compliance reporting right off the bat. So error handling obviously was kind of limited before. It's whatever you came up with. And now moving forward, it's a lot more robust. If you're using MDT or SCCM, you'll get a separate log file now that will tell you what happened to actually enact. So that's kind of the new process in a nutshell. What do you guys think? All right, cool. Thanks for your participation. That could have been really bad. All right, so under the covers, we created, to make this all work with this script, we added 3 new WMI providers. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that these are things that you might want to use on your own outside of your imaging process. So I'm going to give you one example of what you could do as a customer. So let's say you had a machine that maybe hadn't checked in for a while, or you need it for whatever reason to report status immediately. So now you could issue a remote WMI command to that device that said report status. And then as long as you could access that device, it would immediately report status. So you didn't have to wait that 12 hours or wherever it was in its timer process. It'll just happen immediately. So you can kind of think about some of these things you could do. You could maybe even write a script that resets the recovery key every 90 days, even if it hadn't been disclosed. So you could do that and tell it to escrow the recovery key. So just kind of some ideas of some things that you may want to do with these WMI providers. You don't have to by any means, but some customers have asked kind of for some flexibility here, and this would give that to you. So what does this script look like? So the script's called invoke MBAM client deployment. And this is the main script that'll actually do all the work for you. And you can see there's just kind of some simple things here. So there's really only one field that's required, and that's what your recovery service endpoint is. We want to make sure that we escrow the recovery information before we apply encryption to the device so that it can be recovered. Everything else on there is totally optional. So the other one that I'd recommend that you use, though, is one, the status reporting endpoint, because that'll make sure that it reports compliant status immediately. And the second one is wait for encryption to complete. So if you wait for encryption to complete, you get a better compliance story than if you don't. So just make sure that you do that. So this is just a simple example of the command line here. So here I've specified the recovery service endpoint, the status reporting endpoint. I've told it to actually encrypt the data volumes as well. So that won't happen by default. It's only if you want it to happen. So you have to specify that flag if you want a fixed data drive, like your D drive, to encrypt. And I've also changed the encryption strength. So the cipher strength by default is 128. I told it to be 256. So you can do that right from the script. And then the last one I put here is waiting for encryption to complete. So how do you integrate this into your deployment process? So it's pretty simple. So the first thing is we have a really small script that we want you to insert into your task sequence in WinPE. And the whole point of this is to persist that TPM owner auth information if you're using pre-provisioning. So if you're not using pre-provisioning for whatever reason, you don't have to use that part of it because it's not actually taking ownership of the TPM in WinPE. If you are, add this script so that you can escrow that TPM owner auth information later. The second thing you want to do is install the MBAM agent in your full operating system. Now, again, you can put this in your base image. You can do it as you're actually deploying the operating system. It doesn't really matter. It just needs to happen before you run the PowerShell script. And the last thing is you just add a line for the PowerShell script with the command line arguments that you want, and you're good to go. So as I kind of wrote at the bottom here, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. All right, so finally, it's demo time. Let's hope my machine wakes up. One second here. Okay. So for the sake of this demo and for ease of, well, really just the ease of my demo, I'm using MDT. You could definitely do the same thing with Configuration Manager. It's easier for me to just kick stuff off and actually demo this for you using MDT. Concept's exactly the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is this is just a normal deployment share. So if you've done anything with MDT, there's nothing really out of the ordinary here. In your custom settings INI file here, all I'm doing is just skipping a bunch of screens and filling in information that it needs. At the bottom here, I'm telling it that it needs to install with a TPM protector. I'm telling it not to suppress the installation of BitLocker, and I'm telling it to not wait for encryption to complete. So the whole reason I'm telling it not to wait to complete is just because I don't want my task sequence to run for a while. But you would generally want to do that, right? And then I'm just telling it to skip the BitLocker screen. So pretty basic stuff there, right? Hopefully. There we go. Under applications, I just added an application for the MBAM agent. So if I look under here, it's just a normal MSI command line. There's nothing really fancy. So that's just going to install the agent. And then if we look at the task sequences, this is a full, just normal kind of out-of-the-box standard client task sequence. So if we look at where BitLocker actually gets enabled offline for pre-provisioning, when you see this step here, this is all happening in WinPE. And so this step says enable BitLocker offline. So you're in WinPE. There's nothing written to the actual disk. WinPE is obviously running in memory. And so it enables BitLocker before it actually starts to lay down the operating system. So those parameters that we set in the custom settings INI are what tells this script that's running under the covers here to do it. Now this isn't, this is just built into MDT. This step is not actually anything that MBAM is doing directly. So this is the first time after you install the operating system. So you're still in WinPE, you install the operating system. This is where we just added a basic script. So when you get the new version of MBAM, you'll find this script in here. It's called save WinPE TPM owner auth. And I have a typo here. Delete that. Yes. Yes. So yeah, when we release, you'll have access to this script. So all this script is doing, literally, is doing a reg read in WinPE to find the TPM owner auth that got created, and it's writing it to the registry of the operating system that you just laid down. That's all it's doing. So it's a very small script, and that's the extent of it. So that way you don't lose your TPM owner auth information. It will. Yeah, as long as you have the right version of WinPE. So you have to have WinPE 4 or above for pre-provisioning to work. So any of the newer versions of MDT, starting I believe it's with 2013, will support this, as well as Config Manager 2007 will not, because it doesn't support WinPE 4, and 2012 and above will support it. So, all right. So after we do this, we persisted the owner auth to the offline operating system. We reboot into the full operating system at this point. So we're out of WinPE, and then if we get down here, you're going to see I have a custom task in the middle here that's just going to install the MBAM agent. So I just browse to the application I created, and it'll install it. And here's the script that I ran. So the endpoint here is exactly what I was kind of showing you earlier. Whoops. Make sure you guys can see that all right. So bottom line is very simple. So it's just the two endpoints. I told it to not wait for encryption, so you won't see that that flag is set. And I did tell it to do encryption method AES 256 and to escrow the data volumes. So on my physical device here that I'm remoted into, I have two hard drives right now. So I have a C drive and a D drive. So you kind of see what happens there. So the other step, I left this step here. If you use the default task sequences, at the very end, it has this enable BitLocker step. So you don't need that step anymore. So I'm just leaving it here disabled just so that you can see it, but you could delete it out of your task sequence because at this point, BitLocker is off and running. So that's kind of the basic part, basics of what you need to know there. So that seems pretty simple, right? So it's just a couple of steps there. All right. So, say that again. So I have a smaller one just for the sake of time. So all it's going to do is assume you already have an operating system. If I can get my... Yeah, that would have been a good one, right? So I don't know where my screen went here. I might have to reload this just a second. The joy of demos. I don't know if you've run into this issue on Windows 10. Sometimes the Explorer disappears, which is not fun. And I think that's what happened here, so I'm going to hope I can... Let's see if I can bring it back. And there you go. So there's the trick. If Windows 10 builds are going to a black screen, just open Task Manager, and you should be good to go. All right. Sorry for the delay here, guys. And we're back. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we are going to browse to our deployment share that we created. So I'm just going to map a drive to it. So for you, those of you who have done MDT, you've probably done this 1,000 times. So I'm launching lighttouch.vbs, which is just going to pull up the MDT bootstrapper here. And if you remember, I just skipped, in my custom settings I just skipped a bunch of steps because I just don't want to see a bunch of screens. So all I'm doing is selecting my task sequence. I obviously could have automated that as well, but. And so it already installed the agent, and now it's just running that script. So if we kind of watch it over here. Oops, if I can type. So you can see it's encrypting now. So since I'm using use disk-based encryption, it's already 83% done. And you can see here as well, oof, that was scary for a second. You can see here as well the D drive. I don't want to be restarting Explorer every 5 seconds. That'll get annoying. But anyways, you can see that the D drive now is also encrypting, right? So it's at 0.7. So I didn't use disk-based only encryption on that one. I just did it on this other one down below just to make it go faster. So that's the end of that part. So that was pretty easy, right? So just assume that you'd run this in your task sequence, right? You're running in the full operating system. That's pretty much what we simulated there. So I'm going to pause encryption real quick just on my D drive, but I'm going to let it run on my other drive because I'm going to need that for a demo a little bit later. So let me pause this on D. That'll make my VMs run a little bit faster. And then the other thing I was going to show you is that if I launch, if I look at the logs now, you'll see there's this new log here under the deployment logs that got the MDT created called invoke MBAM agent, right? So I can see what happened here. So I checked prereqs, it checked escrowed the TPM owner auth information to the path that I specified. So you get really detailed logs here about what happened, which is great, right? So I can see that it escrowed the recovery key, et cetera. And you can see here, then it started doing the same thing for the data volume. So with just one script and a couple of command lines options, I was able to not only encrypt my operating system drive super easy during imaging, but I also was able to do the same thing for my fixed data drives, which is an ability you didn't really have before. So that's pretty cool. All right. So the question is, what happened to the policies, since we did it this way, what happened to the policies for MBAM, for fixed data drives, and different things like that? So if you're using Configuration Manager, group policy actually doesn't apply while you're running a task sequence. In MDT, it does. So the caveat to all of this is that you should really make sure that policy is not applying to your device. So if you have a staging OU, or you just drop machines that get added to your environment into like the computer's OU and then move it later to the right OU, that's kind of the recommendation. So after you kick off this script, at the very end of your script or of your task sequence, you'd want to move that into the right OU if you're using MDT. If you're using Config Manager, you can just put it in the right OU right off the bat. You don't have to worry about group policy causing a conflict at all. Hope that answers your question. All right. So that's pretty easy, right? It was a snap, as it turns out. Okay, sorry, my keyboard kind of got me in the wrong spot here. Okay, so how do we do this on existing machines? And we just saw how easy it was for, during imaging. We had a pre-provisioned drive. We just added these couple scripts, couple command line options, got it all up and running. Everything's escrowed, reported status, all those sorts of things. So how does this work for an existing machine? So you buy MBAM, you decide you're going to move to BitLocker, you have 30,000 machines in your environment. What's that process? So the first thing that you do is you want to make sure you set up your group policy. So it's the same thing you would do for any device. You want to set the MBAM policies and the BitLocker policies that you have and get those deployed to whatever OUs are appropriate. The next thing you want to do is the painful part, and that's enable TPM. So we talked about that. If some of you guys may already have it on just by default because your text turned it on or something like that. But if you didn't, there's kind of some pain there, and we'll talk through some of the ways around that. The other thing is you want to create the BitLocker system partition. So we've worked with some customers that had already deployed Windows 7 in their environment. They didn't use BitLocker, and they weren't adding the BitLocker partition that was needed, and so they had to kind of run a process to make that happen. The next part is that, as I've worked with customers, I found random machines, and maybe you guys have seen this as well, that for whatever reason, it's mainly Windows 7, the Win32 encryptable volume class, which is a WMI class that says which volumes are encryptable, is corrupt, and that causes BitLocker to completely fail. So luckily, the fix is super simple there, but and I'll show you that in my task sequence too. And then lastly, you want to install the MBAM agent. That's obviously important, and then let MBAM just do its thing. So let's see what that looks like. I'm not going to run a task sequence, but I want to walk you through what it looks like. So all right, so this kind of a concept may look familiar to people that have already done this. So this first one is fixing Win32 encryptable volume. So it's super easy. You just run moffcomp, and you run that against the Win32 encryptable volume moff, and it just rebuilds the corrupted moff file. So even if it's not corrupted, you can run this 1,000,000 times, and it won't hurt anything. So I always just run this by default just to make sure that the device is in a good state and that WMI class is in a good state. So the next thing I'm going to do is there's a tool that's built into Windows called BDE HDCFG. That's a mouthful. And really what this does is it will shrink the partition, and it will create, it keeps varying by Windows version. Sometimes it was 300, 350. I don't know I can't remember what the standard is now, if it's 500 megabytes or something. But it'll create this unencrypted partition that BitLocker can store its keys on. And so pretty much you just run BDE HDCFG -target default -quiet, and that creates that partition for you. Now you do need a restart after this. You'll note that I didn't put one yet though. And here's why, because Any of these TPM enablement tools that are out there by HP, Dell, or Lenovo, I just kind of picked the big 3 hardware vendors that you probably have. They all require a restart to actually turn on the TPM. So for HP, they have a tool called the BIOS configuration utility, and you create a text file that you pass into that says, here's how you enable the TPM. And then the BIOS configuration utility from within the full operating system will grab that and make the BIOS changes, and then you need a restart to make that happen. So you can tell one of the things that I did here, as well as at the folder level, I just said, hey, let's determine if it's an HP. So I just did a query for Win32 computer system where manufacturer equals HP. So that means that when this is running on an HP device, it'll run that section, otherwise go somewhere else. So Dell has a utility called the Dell CCTK. Many of you guys have probably used this one as well. This one's got a few more steps you can see. So first you have to set the BIOS password, then you got to enable TPM, and that's a command as well from the CCTK. Whoops, let me get back here so you can actually see the command. So you run CCTK-TPM on, and then you set a password, and then you restart. Then you activate the TPM, then you restart the computer again. That's what gets that one going. Lenovo, kind of the same concept. So it's got a script that you run that makes the chip active, then you restart. So at that point, all you need to do really is just install the MBAM agent and let it do its thing. Or there's this ability now that you can enact on first run, which is what causes the pin prompt to happen. So you could add this here, and so like after your task sequence is done, it automatically prompted the end user to enter the pin. You don't have to wait the 90 minutes. If you don't care, you can just let it MBAM wake up in 90 minutes and prompt them anyway. Since you're already deploying it to your existing fleet, probably doesn't really matter. And that's how you deploy to existing machines. All right. So the next piece we want to talk about, now that we've kind of gone through this deployment piece, we wanted to show you how you can get your data if you already are a BitLocker customer but not an MBAM customer. So you're seeing all this benefit of MBAM from this session, and you're going to go back and you're going to be a hero in your organization and get MBAM up and running so you can really report on the compliance of your organization, get it up and running quickly. So most enterprises that have rolled it out store their information in Active Directory. That's fine. The problem is that once you roll out MBAM already has all this the help desk portal, and you don't really want your IT staff to have to go to 2 different places to do recovery, right? You don't want them to have to say, oh, well, is this key in Active Directory because that machine hasn't checked in yet? Because maybe the machine was offline, someone went on vacation for a month while you did this whole rollout. Whatever the case may be, you want them to, from day one, be able to go into the help desk portal and do their recovery. So that's kind of one of the things that we wanted to do here, was make that migration really simple. So what we did is we created 4 PowerShell commandlets that you can run. So one of them does a read from Active Directory for recovery information, and the other one does a read of TPM information. So if you are backing up TPM owner auth information to Active Directory, we can grab that for you as well and port it over. We also have 2 write commandlets do the same thing, right? It's just the opposite of the read, and so it'll write that into the MBAM database. You'll see in the middle here, there's this add computer user piece. I'm going to talk about what that script is in a minute. The important thing here is that when you're running these scripts, we're not actually writing any data to Active Directory. We really want to be careful that we're keeping the integrity of your Active Directory, and same with MBAM. So there's integrity checks in MBAM. We only read from Active Directory. We've had some huge customers run this with no issues against their Active Directory, so it's been working great. So if you don't use that computer user script that I just mentioned, only your help desk can your advanced help desk can do recovery. So advanced help desk people are people that don't have to enter the username and domain into the help desk portal to recover. So when you're pulling information from Active Directory, you don't know who the user is of that device. Active Directory doesn't store that information. So you might be storing that information somewhere else. So let's say you're using Configuration Manager. So there might already say, here's all the users of this device. So you can run your own script or process to grab that information out, and you can feed that into these commandlets that we have. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then you're making this user to machine match as you're doing the import of the new data. And when you do that, now your end users can use the self-service portal right out the bat as well without having to check in first. And same with the help desk people. So the normal help desk people can now do recoveries as well. So setting this up in Active Directory so that the scripts can pull is a fairly straightforward process. I have a link here so you can grab my deck later and get that, but there's a script that you can run against Active Directory to grant a particular user or group rights to read those BitLocker keys, because by default, you can't really read that unless you're a domain admin, so this will let you do that. The other piece you need is an AD group that you tie into MBAM so that only those people can write data. So you wouldn't want just anyone to be able to just keep writing data to the MBAM database, so this kind of controls that. So this is kind of a simple example, kind of an end-to-end example of reading from Active Directory. And then here we have a parameter that if you were storing the user of the device in the managed by attribute of the device in Active Directory, we'll grab that for you automatically, and we'll push that in when we're writing the information to MBAM. So that's one benefit that you can do. The other one is, you can see in the middle here, it's talking about a from computer user mapping. So if you had a custom place, like a custom inventory system or something like that, and you wanted to make these associations yourself, then you just create a CSV file that has two columns. It just has a computers column and a users column, and you pass it in here. And then that way you've also done the same thing. So these are pretty simple, as you can see, to run. Not much is needed outside of just making sure that you have the appropriate rights and whatnot set up. So let's do a really quick demo here. Let me flip over. One second. All right, so I've already got some machines in Active Directory that are not in my MBAM database, so I've kind of already pre-configured that. So they already have recovery information, they have TPM information. And one of the things that I'm going to run here, or show you, is the CSV. So I've just created a couple of PCs here. You can notice it's a very simple CSV file. So here's the PC, and then here is the user associated with that PC. And then let's grab our PowerShell here. All right, so the first thing I do is I'm going to enter credentials for a user that has access to Active Directory. So I'm just going to throw that in there real quick. So now we got that variable. And then the first one that I'm going to do here is, let me get the right one. I'm going to grab the recovery information. So when I paste this in here, oops, I've got to be in the right directory. That's important. Oops, we'll get there. I'll get there, hopefully. All right, great. Okay, so now if we run it, we need to import our, since this commandlet is different, the add user computer, and that's what I'm trying to specify here, I have to import the module first so that it understands it. Third time's a charm, hopefully, here. That looks a little better. So what this is doing is it's actually recursing through my Active Directory, and it's finding all the computer objects that have recovery information in it, and it's writing it. So you can see a bunch of errors here, but the reason for those errors, that's actually expected in this particular case, because we just put a bunch of garbage data in there to test it, and so some of those aren't valid recovery keys, and it knows that, so it didn't write garbage to our MBAM database. So that's actually a good sign that we got this information. All right, and then the other example is we actually have some TPM information for these as well. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And you can see those went in without any problem. So all the TPM information we had was totally valid. So now, if we look in here, You can see we got Mike and Lance. Those were the users that I had specified there. I can look at my keys table. You can see I've got a bunch of keys that I imported here, quite a few things. And it actually made the user association here as well for those devices, right? So if we look down here, you can see we've got a volume ID and a user ID. So those ones that start in the 1,000 there, those are the ones that I imported already. So now, with just a very simple set of commandlets that we ran, we're able to get all of your recovery information over from Active Directory into MBAM. All right, we just got a couple more things we're going to talk about here. So we have a custom pre-boot recovery URL. We talked about this. So in the previously, what would happen? I'm going to change slides here. So previously, what happens is that your advanced help desk people, they have to enter a recovery key and just enter the key ID. Your help desk people, these are kind of different roles within the MBAM help desk portal. They have to enter both a valid username and password of someone that was already on that device. And then with self-service, the person that's actually trying to hit the self-service portal has to be logged into a device where it'll do Windows integrate off, and then they can grab that key. So those are kind of the three experiences. But really what we're trying to enable here is self-service, right? Everybody wants self-service because it cuts your help desk costs. And so the process is an end user hits their recovery screen. This is the process today. They hit the recovery screen. The recovery screen tells them to go to OneDrive. They go to OneDrive, and their key's not there because they're in your enterprise. And where are we storing it? We're storing it in MBAM. So they're frustrated, right? So they call the help desk because they don't know what else to do. OneDrive isn't where their stuff is. So that's the sad face experience. We don't want that to happen, right? So now what we've done is we let you customize that BitLocker recovery screen. So instead of seeing the OneDrive URL that you'll see here, hopefully, instead of seeing that URL there that just points you at OneDrive, now you can put in your own message. So you can say, sorry you hit this issue. Go to this URL, which is the self-service URL, or you can call the help desk. So you can put as much text in there as you want to make that custom to your environment. And now when I'm in the moment as an end user and I'm stuck and don't know what to do, you just told them what to do for your organization. So that's a really cool feature. That's something that only comes in Windows 10, something that we're shipping with Windows 10. And it's really easy to set up. All you set up is a group policy, and that's it. All right, so quickly, I'm just going to show you this experience. Make that bigger. All right, so if I look at the policy, I'm going to go down to the MBAM policies. And that one's going to be under operating system drive. And so if I look here, I've got this configure pre-boot URL, message in URL. So I have two options here, and I select which one, or three options technically. So I can use the default message. So that's just the one that you saw about OneDrive. So for whatever reason you wanted to back out of what you had specified, you can put that. Or you can use this custom recovery message, which is you specify all of the text. So whatever you want it to say, that's what will show up in that pre-boot screen. And the last one is you want to keep the message, but you want to replace the URL. So the benefit of that is if you're multinational, for example, they've already localized that pre-boot screen. And so all you want to do is replace the URL so that as an end user logs into that device, they see it in their language, and the only thing that's different is the URL. So that's the time that you'd want to use that particular option. Otherwise, I'd recommend just specifying whatever you want. So once you set this, when an end user logs into their device, let's see if we can get one pulled up here. Shut this guy down and turn him back on. All right, so this is the standard screen. I have a password protector here, but I forgot my password, darn it, because I'm just under so much pressure up here. So I'm going to hit escape to go into recovery. So let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger for you. Maybe. Looks like I can't make that one bigger. Sorry, I can't magnify that. But Anyways, right now it's got the default message, so that's not great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go change my policy real quick. And I'm going to tell it to use the custom one that I said. So I got to get into the full OS here. Pardon the VM video issue. So we'll get the new policy. Great. All right, so now we're going to reboot. All right, so now you can see that that message is different. So this is what I'd specified in my group policy. So I said, sorry you hit this issue. You should go to this URL, which is my self-service portal, to get your recovery key. So again, you could put your phone number in there. You could say, like, if this doesn't work, then call 1-800 whatever. Completely up to you. But that's a really cool feature to help you get more value out of MBAM, as well as the self-service portal and whatnot. So. It's in the template, but it's to actually get it to write to the BCD is a Windows 10 only feature. So as you move to Windows 10, this is one of the benefits that you'll get. All right, we just got a couple more things here. So the other piece I talked about is how painful TPM lockouts are. Who in here has experienced a TPM lockout? Lots of you, and it was painful. So TPM lockouts get caused by a few different things. There's incorrect PIN attempts. There's, you enter your PIN wrong on your smart card, your virtual smart card a few times. There's lots of things that can happen. And so when that starts happening, the TPM says, whoa, I'm being under attack, and it locks itself out. And it automatically sends you into, when you reboot, into the BitLocker recovery screen where you have to enter the 48-digit key. So the lockout, we already talked about lockout duration, totally varies. TPM 2.0, it's non-issue because it's 2 hours. So the process today with the existing versions is that if you want to unlock it, you have to call the help desk. The help desk has to have the TPM owner auth, first of all, which we already talked about. There's kind of some challenges there in some situations. And then they have to send it to you, and you have to be an admin to actually unlock it. So that's a bunch of steps, a bunch of calls I have to make. That's really crappy. And half the time, they don't even know that it's locked out, right? Because what end user knows what the heck a TPM is? Nobody does. Even your help desk probably doesn't even know. So there were some problems there. So what is the easy way? The easy way is that we've made it so that TPM 1.2 devices can automatically unlock themselves. So you have to enable this feature since it's kind of a security feature. You have to enable it as you're configuring the new version of MBAM. And then you also have to configure a GPO for those devices that you want to enable this for. So once you've done that, you also have to make sure that obviously the TPM owner auth for that device is in the MBAM database. So what does this process of unlocking look like? So first, an end user hits the BitLocker recovery screen because they got locked out once. They go recover their key from either the self-service portal, hopefully, or they call the help desk, unlock the device. So the way that MBAM works is once that key's been disclosed, we assume it's just in the wild. The user might have put a post-it note on their computer for the next time they run into that issue. So we actually reset that key for them, and we'll escrow it. So we detect that the key is disclosed, and then we'll also check, we'll reset the key and send the new key up. And then we also check at that point, we say, hey, since this key was disclosed, something might be a little iffy with this box. So let's actually check and see if the TPM is locked out. If the TPM is locked out, we'll go hit the MBAM backend, and we'll look for an owner auth for that machine. And if we find one, which hopefully we will with all the changes that we made and that you're going to implement here, then we'll automatically unlock it under the covers. So that way the end user never has to know that happened. They don't have to wait 6 days or call the help desk or do all this manual stuff. It'll just automatically get unlocked for them. So that'll increase their productivity and cut down on your help desk calls, or multiple help desk calls especially. So when we unlock it on the client, we'll actually put something in the event log that tells you what happened, so that you know that an auto unlock occurred. And on the server side, we also have some audit reports, and we'll indicate that auto unlock occurred. So you can actually see like how many TPM issues you're having in your environment just by querying that audit report. So there's some good value you can get there as well. So I had a demo for this, and it was really iffy because, like I mentioned, TPM 1.2 is hard. So I would lock out my TPM, and then 30 seconds later it would unlock itself. So it was really hard to get the timing for this, but you'll just have to trust me that it works. So if you want to try it out yourself when you get the new version, it's pretty easy to do. Pretty much all I was doing to lock out the TPM was I would try and send it. I tried to change the owner auth with something that was invalid, and it'd do it a bunch of times, like every second. And so then it would say, oh, I'm under attack, and it would lock itself out. But with my TPM, it went 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 12 hours. So that was kind of how bad it was for me. So I actually didn't really want to risk it in here. So sorry you can't see it, but just trust me, it auto unlocks. So we showed you a lot of cool stuff today, I hope. We've talked to you about improvements we've made to deployment. We talked about some cool stuff with getting your recovery information over to MBAM from Active Directory if you're a new customer to MBAM, but you'd already deployed BitLocker. And we talked about auto unlocking the TPM and some of the benefits you can get there. So there's a lot of cool things. I know you guys are dying to get your hands on this, and you want to know, when is it coming out? So this will all be available around the Windows 10 timeframe. So when that gets released, we'll be releasing shortly thereafter, very shortly thereafter. So that's when this will all be in your hands. And hopefully you're all looking forward to it. You can see how easy it is to deploy BitLocker in your environment, even going forward. So if you already have processes to deploy it today, this will make it tons easier for you, and more robust, better logging, all those sorts of things. We'll persist that TPM owner auth information. So there's really a lot of good stuff that we've shown you. So that's kind of the conclusion here, is that really MBAM 2.5 SP1 really should make it much easier and simpler and less costly for you to deploy BitLocker and protect your data in your organization and on all the devices that you have. Are there any questions? I've got a couple minutes left here. How what? How upgradable? So the process on the server is going to be uninstall, reinstall. So you're just reconfiguring it. It's a very straightforward install, so it shouldn't be that challenging to do. There'll be a few new fields in there, as we talked about the SSP branding. So when you uninstall and you're reinstalling it, the SSP branding pieces are now going to be right in the UI, which makes it much easier for you to get that up and running and reconfigured. On the client, it's just an in-place upgrade. There's no reboots that are required or anything. You want to prompt your end users to close anything. So the client's very straightforward. Yes, and update the templates. Thank you. The ADMX templates. Correct. Yeah, so this makes the assumption that, the question was, this makes the assumption that the TPM auto unlock piece, that the client can access the server, the MBAM server, and that's correct. So it has to grab the information from the MBAM server to be able to do it. Yeah. Any other questions? Say that one more time. Uh-huh. Sure, so that's something you can set up in your environment. So, I mean, internally at Microsoft, we can access our corporate network from our phones. So we just hit the URL from our phone once we're connected to the wireless, and it works great. So it, no, any device. I mean, it's just a URL. So.
The problem with that I see is that customers can't get to the cell phone unless they're on the corporate network.
Right.
They have to be logged in as themselves so that they can authenticate against it. Because if they're logged, if you go to another PC that's logged in with a different credentials and try to get to the portal, they'll tell you that you can't get to it. So you're not authorized to get your own.
Right. So you'd have to log into that device as that user, or you can launch IE as a different user. That's kind of how that is. Yeah. Yep. Contact info, I can give that to you after, so it's not on the video. I don't want 100,000 people kind of emailing me every day. It's our personal tech support. So anyways, that's it. So I guess we could stop the recording. No, that's great. I'll stick around and I'll answer questions, but that'll just kind of end the session. So thanks, everybody.